Welcome to another Acts Church podcast. Glad you're with us today. My name is Hunter Croft, and I'm on staff here at Acts Church. And if you're new with us, we're glad you found us. You can check us out. We've got a lot of podcasts and sermons out there. Check us out at www.actscampus.org. But today, we don't have, it's usually just me and our pastor, David Robinson, talking. And I say usually about 75% of the time. But we're in a 25% of the time type of week. Today I have Kristen with me, who's also on staff. And we have someone new to the Acts Church podcast. It is Pastor David's son, Ethan Robinson. Go ahead and say hello.
Hey guys, what's up?
And he is one of our youth students here. You are 15?
Yeah.
Yes, 15 years old.
You are 15,
going on 15. Oh.
Yeah, there you go.
But
I'm pretty sure it's 16 going on 17, but I changed it.
Oh, well, yeah. You're in that time of your life where you can make that song work for any year you're in, because as long as it ends in teen, you're good.
Yeah.
So you've got 4 more years of that. So you're going into your sophomore year now?
No, junior.
Junior year?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got to keep up. So yeah, we're glad to have both of you with us today. We're going to talk about appropriately. We're going to talk about our youth experiences growing up. We all grew up in the church. We all have experienced youth group growing up, but all have experienced different youth groups growing up, have different perspectives on that. So we're going to be talking about how we interacted as youth group members, or just kids that were around church, and what we liked and what we didn't like, and the things that we were going through. So I'd like to start with Kristen, just a quick description of how you interacted with church as a youth.
Youths. So yeah, I went to youth group for most of middle school and a little bit of high school, not a lot. I grew up going to the Village Church in Dallas, which is a pretty big church. Well, at the time, it was not as big as it is now, but I really loved going to youth group in the summer because we did this thing called the Village Games. And so basically, they would divide our whole youth group into like different colored teams. And every week we would play either like athletic games or do these giant scavenger hunts and basically compete all summer. It was like this giant tournament. And so at the end of the year, whoever won like the village games, they got like a huge pizza party and ice cream and got to hang out with all the youth leaders and stuff. So that was always something I really looked forward to in the summer, and I always thought was a lot of fun. I didn't always go when it was like soccer or like basketball games because I'm not that competitive, but we'd also play like dodgeball, or like I said, we played this game called Bigger and Better. So we all started out with a car air freshener, and then we had to go around the neighborhoods to like different parts of the neighborhoods and knock on doors and trade people this air freshener for something else.
That's funny.
And I think the team that won that night started out with an air freshener and ended up with a foosball table that stayed in our church building for the longest time. I don't know if it's still there.
I hear about people like getting legitimately good items out of that game.
Yeah. I think my team ended up with like a lawn chair or something kind of lame.
My friend in college played this game just within the dorm, and he started out, and this is a pretty small dorm. I think there's probably 60 guys living in there.
Yeah.
He started with a pen, and he ended up with an Xbox.
That's so cool.
I have no idea how
dope.
he did it.
He probably got like a really cool Pokemon card or something along the way. I don't know.
Something
that was like worth trading their Xbox for.
I think what happened was there was like someone in the school who like just had too much money and didn't understand the value of things, and so they're like,
those are always fun people to hang out with.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, sure, I'll take this Post-it note stack, and here's an Xbox controller, and then he like ended up trading, and someone had like 2 Xboxes or something like that, but only 1 Xbox controller. So it was just weird stuff that worked out really well for him, so now he has an Xbox.
Yeah.
So shout out to you, Logan. Congratulations.
There you go. Getting an Xbox, that's pretty sweet. Anyway, yeah, so we did fun things like that in the summer, and then the rest of the school year, we pretty much had little like small groups. So we would go to church on Saturday night. Youth group would be on Saturday night because our church did services on Saturday and on Sunday mornings. And so our youth service would be Saturday nights. We would do worship and hear a message. And then we would try and all go to church together like on Sunday evenings, because we also had a Sunday evening service. And like the whole youth group would sit together because, you know, nobody in the ages between like 12 and 17 wants to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning to go to church.
Right.
So we would all sit together on Sunday evenings, and that was a lot of fun. And then Wednesday nights, we had basically like discipleship groups that were divided up between like school districts, because like I said, this is a really big church, and grades. So you had like this school district middle school girls, this school district middle school boys, high school girls. And that was really awesome because you got to interact with kids not only at your school, but like your rival high school. So that was really fun when football season would come around, like your youth group, small group or whatever would basically like have not like gambling bets, but we would have bets on like, oh, whoever loses this high school football team or whatever has to pay for dinner or bring this to discipleship group or something next week.
Like competitions with the different small groups.
Yeah,
cool.
which was really, really fun. So it was a good dynamic. I shout out to my youth group leader, Jesse, if you're listening to this. Has such a huge special place in my heart. Never in a million years would I ever thought that I'd be helping out with life group, but when I got called back into the church here at Acts, it was one of the first things God called me to do, was to help out with the teens. And I think about her on the regular basis when I have some issues with my middle school or high school girls. Sometimes I think about messaging her and be like, what would you say? Or how did you deal with this? Or like, was I this ridiculous when I was in middle school? And her answer usually is always yes. And way worse.
Yes.
And so just like shout out to all those youth group people now, and if you ever were, for just like having that big of an impact on our teens. I think it's really important, and I think for a lot of people you do impact their lives, and they think about you a lot. So yeah.
Now, Ethan, I feel like you're not going to feel free to talk because your youth group leaders are here in the room with you. But but be honest, how has your experience been? As this is a different youth group than very different youth group than what Kristen just described, where it was we don't have small groups broken up by school district here. Right. So how has your experience been over the last 4 years now?
It's been pretty positive.
Well, let's talk about, you've got a few different experiences because you were in Tennessee beforehand. Yeah. So first let's talk about your first experience through Tennessee. How's that experience?
Well, in Tennessee, the church was really close because everyone was homeschooling. All the kids were homeschooling, and all the families lived pretty close to each other. So we would hang out all the time outside of church, and so it was really a different feel from recent youth groups I've been in, because I've been in some really big ones, and then this one is about the same size, but it's not like we're all homeschooling and we're all super close to each other.
A little more diverse.
Yeah. So basically, you knew everyone in the youth group, and you could talk to anybody about anything just because you were so close, you know.
And you all had these same family dynamics going on.
Yeah.
That everybody kind of had a similar background and expectation of how you interact socially.
Yeah.
Cool. And then so now here at Acts Church, we have some homeschool families, but go ahead and talk about how you see this.
Well, it's kind of different in the way of hanging out outside of youth group and being able to talk to them in different ways, because in Tennessee, it was like, I'd be like, oh, hey, we should hang out and talk about this issue I'm having, and then we can just, play around and be idiots because we're kids.
Oh, right.
So that was 90% of what we were doing, was
just
not
hanging out.
Talking, just hanging out, yeah. But when I come up here, it's more about talking about issues and getting through stuff and helping and supporting each other, because I was not in high school,
You're right,
I was in middle school and elementary school, so we didn't have as many issues. It would just be drama, like, oh, my friend, he said I was stupid, and I cried, and yeah,
a little more juvenile of issues happening.
And now it's struggling with like actual big issues. So it's really important to be able to communicate, and that's what I really enjoy about this youth group is you can talk with the kids, you can talk with the leaders, and they're willing to talk to you and really just help you through what you're going through.
Very cool. Yeah, high school is definitely, I think we see high school too much as a time when you're still a youth student, but really high school is the time where you're transitioning from as a freshman a youth student to as a senior, you're basically an adult. You're whether you're 18 or not yet. Will you be 18 before you graduate?
I think so.
Okay, so you'll be, legally an adult at that point, and what you do with your life, you're basically going to be making some pretty big adult decisions. So yeah, those bigger decisions start coming up during this time in your life, almost regardless of what youth group you're in or whether you're in youth group. You're transitioning from your problems being, this friend said something mean about me, and those problems don't really go away, but you start getting bigger problems like I need to be able to afford a car. I need to be able to, I'm trying to make decisions for myself. Maybe my parents aren't supporting, not that this is you, but for some high school students, maybe my parents aren't supporting me, or my parents want me to go a different direction, or my parents are supporting me, but this other thing's happening.
Something else that I've noticed that some of our students in our youth group struggle with, that I didn't really have any experience struggle with in high school or going to my church, was we have a lot of students, a part of our youth groups, who parents aren't believers. And so growing up in the Bible Belt in Texas, like everybody went to church, everybody's parents, like they loved God, they quote unquote believed in Jesus and had a relationship with Jesus. Here it's really different because I encounter a lot of students who are asking my advice like, hey, my parents are doing this, this, and this, and I don't agree with that, and I think it's bad, and I don't know how to handle that as a child. And I'm pretty much like, I don't know, like I don't have any experience with that. And that was just a new issue that I've really learned, not necessarily how to deal with, but just like it's something that I've experienced and have just really had to rely on God and through prayer for these kids and their families, because that's something in Texas, and I don't know, probably in Tennessee too, that you're just not used to dealing with, is people whose parents aren't a believer and how they're having struggling relationships with them and the things that they're doing that their children don't approve of or are having a hard time coping with or whatever. So that's definitely a huge difference between
That's actually
groups.
So yeah, it definitely must be at least somewhat regional, because growing up in Spokane, I definitely had a lot of friends whose parents either didn't go to church or weren't believers at all, who were coming to youth group with me, and we're trying to face those same questions of, okay, so my parents don't, sometimes it would just be, my parents just don't see the value in me, spending this much money to go to a church camp, or they don't see value in me skipping this school event to go to youth group, or staying up later doing my homework because I'm at youth group. And sometimes it'd be flat out the parents don't want them to come to youth group, and we had to make the decisions sometimes of, well, do we provide you with a ride to youth group even though your parents don't want you to go? And it was sometimes be sad because we would not have somebody there because their parents didn't want them to be there, even though we knew really it's probably best for you to be there, but we also have to walk that line of respecting the parents' wishes. And that's something that I've not been as involved with the youth group here as I was with my youth group growing up, because it's not my main position here, but I have gotten to see that as I'm at youth group most weeks and get to see what those kids are going through and how they deal with parents that don't want them here or don't necessarily support them in coming here. And it's really interesting to see, really interesting and sad to see how students are having to go through that. But it's also really cool to be able to see the change that's happening in those students' lives and how they can recognize this is something good for my life. And hopefully, parents will see that and go, wow, my student is being affected by this ministry, and maybe it's something that I should look into myself as well. So I'll tell a little bit more of my story growing up. I grew up in Spokane, like I said, and my dad was the youth minister. He was a volunteer, so he probably was only doing 10 hours a week with youth ministry type things. So that's probably quite a bit different from Kristen, your experience in Dallas, because you probably had 2 or 3 people full-time paid staff at that church doing
more
youth.
than that.
Yeah.
We had interns, we had pastors, we had associate pastors, and I think, I might be wrong, but I think we might have even had, I don't know if he was paid, but like a worship person for youth.
For youth.
Exclusively.
That's cool. Yeah, see that was kind of more similar to some of my experiences in Boise. I was at a youth group where there were probably only 3 people who were actually full-time paid staff. But
in Boise, that's where you were an intern, right?
Boise, yes, I was not a youth student there. I was helping lead the youth group, and that's another thing is in Boise we had a Bible college there that was sending out 100 students every night to different youth groups to go be leaders, and so that was a very different feel. Growing up for me in Spokane, the youth group band was the youth leading, and we'd have 1 or 2 leaders from the adult leaders helping us lead the band, but worship was always student led, because
that's so cool.
we had a very musically gifted student group for some reason at that time.
Were you in it?
Yeah, it
That's
was.
so cool.
That's how I got into worship. Was I started taking guitar lessons from a lady in our church, and then started. I think for like a whole year, I just practiced with the Wednesday night youth group worship band, and then eventually I started playing guitar for it, and then. At the same time, I just had a lot of friends who came up to be good musicians around that same age, and so we ended up just like kind of taking over the band as a group of youths in the youth group. Yes,
Yeah.
youths, and that had its. We lacked some maturity in some ways, and so that kind of had its own downfalls. But it was also
Right.
really cool to be able to. I mean, we did like benefit concerts and things like
That's
that.
so awesome.
Which was a really good experience for me, and definitely kind of changed how I developed as eventually became a worship leader. I had not really planned on being a worship leader at that time, but I obviously became one. And so, yeah, it was very much smaller than what you're talking about in Dallas, and what I was experiencing in Boise. Boise, I think, feels a lot more like the South, a different culture in general, but much more churched than you see here.
Yeah.
In Boise, there were probably within a 20-minute drive of where I lived in Boise, there were probably 8 or 9 churches with more than 2,000 people.
Yeah,
in
and
them,
that's how it was where I was too.
right.
growing
And
up.
here, I can think of 3 churches that are probably about that size here in Vancouver.
Yeah, in the entire
Yeah,
area. Yeah.
and there's more people here than there are in Boise, so just a very different dynamic when you are almost expected to have students in your youth group, whereas here you kind of have to change people's minds about what your students should be doing on Wednesday night. So, Kristen, you mentioned a little bit ago you had some summer experiences,
Yeah.
and we are heading into summer. We just had most of our students had their last day of school within the last week or so, including Ethan here. He's on his summer break now, which he started off with a bike trip, which I don't. Do you want to talk about that?
Do you want to share that story?
Sure.
Let's hear the details.
Well, that way everybody who listens to that will know the story, and you won't have to like retell them about it. So that's a
Exactly.
pro. If someone asks like what happened to your face, you can just plug the podcast and be
like,
like,
listen.
"Yo, go listen," and I won't have to explain it.
Yeah. Well, no one can see my face right now.
Oh, we're filming this. You don't see the cameras, but we're filming this.
We're not.
oh,
No,
really?
we're not. We're not.
It's funny though, because not long before this, I had thought like, oh, maybe we should start filming these and putting them on YouTube. It might happen.
Not a fan.
Comment below whether or not you want to see these filmed. All right. Anyway, so go ahead, Ethan. What happened?
So I was biking 2 days ago.
On
and-
Sunday. It was on Sunday.
Yeah,
after
it was
church.
on Sunday after church. And my mom basically dropped me off, and she tried to get into her school, but then they revoked her pass, and she was kind of mad about it.
Sad day.
That's beside
That's
the point. So she left me instead of staying at the school, which would have been really nice if she would have stayed at the school. And basically, she was like, "Be safe. Let's meet at this trail and take the dogs, and we're gonna take them on this trail, and then we're gonna, whatever, exercise."
Meet back up.
And I was like, "All right, cool." So if you've ever been to the Lacamas trails, it's like there's a main gravel path, and then there's these dirt paths that like offshoot from it. And I was on one called Red Tape, and there was just this patch of rocks and roots, which I've been over lots of times. And I really wasn't paying much attention. I had headphones in for the first time I'd ever ridden on a mountain trail with headphones in. And I was like, all right, I got to get the right music for this. So I put
Gotta
on
get
some
pumped.
Ooh, the tunes.
yeah, so I turn on some like intense music, and this is the first obstacle. And I'm at the top of the hill looking at this, and I'm like, all right, we're going to get through this, and we're going to do this really fast, and it's going to be awesome. So I turn on some music, and then I just blast down this hill. And instead of going over it, my body kind of goes forward into the handlebars. I flip over, and I just slam my face on the ground. I didn't even expect it. This is a little gross, but instantly it was like I was bleeding a lot.
Yeah.
And
Face
I'm not
bleeds.
used to that. Yeah, I'm not used to getting hurt in my face or bleeding from my face. But I was instantly bleeding.
This is not normal.
Yeah. And I was like, this is so ironic. The first time I'm out of bike class and I go on this trail, I get hurt.
Were you by yourself?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. See, that's so scary.
Yeah, I was by myself. So I sat down for about 30 seconds, just like groaning and muttering stuff. And then I call my mom and I'm like, I'm really hurt right now. I don't want to move because I'm in so much pain.
Oh,
And
no.
she was like, where are you? Can I drive to get you? And I'm like, no.
You're gonna have to
and
hike out.
I was like, well, I don't think you're gonna be able to hike out, take my bike, and like carry me. So I'm just gonna have to get out of here. So
What a trooper, man.
meet up at the Catholic church, basically. And she was like, okay. And basically what happened was I had to turn around and head a different way because red tape's a really hard trail. And basically I passed a lot of people. They would always look at me funny, and I was
They
just
wouldn't.
like,
They didn't even ask for help. Rude.
they
Oh,
didn't.
man.
They just kind of
Ouch.
glanced at me and were like,
Oh,
Something's
that's
wrong
such a
with
bummer.
you.
And dude, no, you guys can't see it, but his face is like ripped up. Like he's got sores, not on the side of his face. It's literally just the front of his face, like his nose and his lip and his chin. Like it's torn up, you guys.
Yep.
Like if I saw somebody bleeding from their face, like with the face that you look like right now,
Yeah.
I would help. Like that's awful.
Yeah, you don't look like, oh,
He just,
maybe you got a paper cut or something
Right,
like
no,
that.
like you look
Yeah.
like I'm surprised
I
you
look
didn't
like
break your
Red Skull.
nose or get a concussion
yeah,
because
you don't have black eyes either.
yeah,
I was-
that's surprising.
yeah, that's another thing. I was so lucky. So my nose and my teeth took the brunt of the impact.
Oh,
So
like you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
So my nose, I guess it folded sideways because it didn't break at all.
Oof.
It's fine.
that's
no
good.
That
fractures,
is good.
nothing. And then my teeth might be fine.
Yeah.
One of my teeth, one of my front teeth, is a little bent,
Ooh.
and it got a little hairline fracture in it sideways.
Ow.
And I might need a root canal, or I might be fine. So
Well,
just
time
rolling
will
the
tell.
dice. Yeah.
It's a good way to start your summer. That's
Yeah.
some
Yes.
positive vibes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's growing up. I remember summers was always a time when I had a lot more injuries and a lot more fun. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
You might have had a little more injuries than fun this time, but it balances out in the end usually. So yeah, Kristen, you had what else did you do in the summers? Because I think summer for me was always an intense time for youth group.
Yeah. Summer definitely at my church picked up the youth group activities for sure. Both of my parents worked, so they tried to get me as involved as possible in youth groups.
Out of
and
the house.
out of the house. So actually, my mom mentored a lot of college age students when I was in middle school and high school. So she would always like kind of hand me off to them and be like, I'll pay you gas money if you take her and get her to do as many things as possible. So one summer, me and this 20-year-old girl, we went to an old folks home and played bingo, and I have a little bit of PTSD from that. I literally got cussed out by this elderly person for trying to help them play bingo. It was really bad, and I've been, so that's like scarred me for life. So they would take me to do stuff like that. They would take me to like concerts. They would just, hang out and go swimming with me. Our youth group would do basically this big summer mission trip where we would go to downtown Dallas, this place called South Dallas, which is a pretty rough part of Dallas. A lot of gang violence, prostitution rings, a lot of homeless people. And of course, we didn't get involved in the drug gang banging and whatever. What we would do basically is we would go help this church, and we would put on a VBS for this church that would basically open up their church for kids who couldn't afford lunches during school. So they would have this basically daycare program at their church, and we would put on a VBS and we would feed them lunches. We would also do some stuff with the homeless and the elderly people who went to this church. We would go to these elderly people's houses and do yard work for them or paint their houses. And so we literally spent 7 days in downtown Dallas putting on a VBS, going to food shelters, doing yard work, helping people paint their houses, basically doing service projects. And that was really, really, really enjoyable. Those are some of my favorite memories that I did with youth camp, just hanging out with the kids there and feeding the homeless. Our church also did a church-wide program called Transform. And since we had such a big church, at this point we're basically a multi-site church. So we had sites in 3 different locations. And so these 3 different locations would gather service projects pertaining to the schools and their community, and we would go out and work on schools, whether that was cleaning the schools, putting up playground equipment, painting the schools. It would be a whole church-wide thing that would happen on a Saturday, and the whole church would go out to whatever school that their church site was located to, and you would go and you would help, build up this school and spend time and with the kids, because they would also, the kids at the school, they would invite the kids of the community to come like be a part to make their school better. And so we had a lot of service projects going on in Dallas in the summer, which is just brutal because it's like 107 and like it's hot. I remember for my youth group when we would go to South Dallas, I remember this one day where we were outside working on this person's lawn and painting their house, and then we went to the zoo after, or the aquarium or something outside, and I ended up having a heat stroke that evening and like passing out on the concrete because I got so hot. Like, never sweat so much in my entire life, but it was so rewarding and it was so fun. So summer and youth group have some of my favorite memories tied to it for sure.
You had a little bit of heat stroke, but you had some fun.
Right. I had way more fun and I gave back to the community, so it all cancels out. It's fine.
Yeah. Very cool. So that you obviously did some cool work for the community. How do you think that changed the path of your life? Do you think that played a significant impact on what you decided to do after your youth years?
I don't know that it so much was significant after, but it was really significant in the time. I mean, it could surely have played a part in what I do now. But
you don't think that it affects how you view ministry and things like that today?
I think it does. But I don't think I knew that then. What I knew then was I grew up in a pretty like affluent neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so going to those parts of the neighborhoods and giving back just really made you appreciate where you came from. And that's something that I remember talking about with the girls that I was close to in high school and in middle school, and something we would talk about in our small groups when we came back, of just like how life-changing these experiences are, because you realize like how fortunate you are. And
yeah, some perspective.
Exactly. And I think, that definitely affects you, I guess, for the rest of your life. But it also, I guess to go back to the ministry question, it reminds me that there's ministry to be done everywhere, and there's acts of service that you can do anywhere for anyone. And it doesn't matter if you're affluent or not. There's always people who are in need, and there's always ways to serve and get connected and plugged into your community. And so,
because even though you're from an affluent neighborhood, usually you as kids didn't probably have money. But what you did have was a summer full of time.
Right. Exactly.
And usually kids your age have good health. So you had your time and your health to pour out to these people and help them that way. Very cool. I'll share a little bit about my growing up summers because, first off, I'll say, I think I like summer more than anyone I know likes summer. I think I more strongly prefer the season of summer than
it's
anybody.
Because you grew up in the Northwest.
That's part of it. Definitely is. The Northwest winters and springs and falls can be particularly brutal. But I've just always loved, if it's under 80 degrees, I'm a little disappointed with the temperature. I love it when and people always be like, oh no, it's gonna be 100 degrees, and I'd always be like, yeah, it's gonna be 100 degrees.
That's
Bring
crazy
it on.
To me.
I love, and of course. Sometimes I go, oh, what did I wish for? Because I go out and try to, ride my bike or something like that. And and just about have a heat stroke. And so, but I would still rather be in having a heat stroke than be freezing cold.
That's
so,
fair.
So first off, I just love summer regardless of what I would do as a youth group student. But our youth group would always, of course, have our camps during the summer. Mm-hmm. And even before I was a youth student, I was always around the church enough to see all of the middle school and high school students getting ready for these camps and doing cool events. And it was always just a very exciting time for me. And my youth group, we would go to a camp or something called CIY Move. If you've heard of that, it's Christ in Youth. And it was this youth conference that we would go to in Corvallis, Oregon. They did, I think they do something like 25 of these conferences during the summer, which, so several weeks they have 2 of them going on the same week and stuff like that. And so ours was in Corvallis, Oregon. That was the closest one to us, which was, it was a pretty good drive for us, but it was so much fun getting on the road with your friends and getting to experience life. For them, it was away from their parents. For me, it was still with my parents there, but it was a little bit different, My parents weren't acting as much like parents and more like youth leaders at that point. And so really cool time to just go be out in the world with my friends. And, it kind of puts you in some situations where you have to make more adult-like decisions. You know, I have this much money for this week. My parents give me this much money for this week. And some of my friends would go spend the $40 their parents gave them on playing cards, something like that, you know, like Pokemon cards, something like that, the first day. And they'd get to the next stop and they'd be like, all right, it's lunchtime. And they would realize that they
I have no money.
I have $2.50 to make last for all my lunches. This happened every year, at least with one freshman.
Oh my
One
gosh,
freshman every year would
yes.
do something like this, and it was always really hilarious to watch. And they'd obviously have to start bumming money eventually, but
Right.
so you know you start to see those consequences play out just because you're not in the home anymore. But also those camps are always so impactful. So they'd have really cool worship experiences, and but also just the sheer size of the worship experience. You're there with so
massive,
many
yeah.
people. You know, I don't know how many people we usually had at this one. I think it was probably like 300 students usually at this conference. And so you're used to worshiping, you know, with your 25, at least
Right.
my youth group was about 25 youth friends. And then you go into this auditorium with 300 people and you're worshiping there with them. And it's just a whole different experience, a whole new way of seeing worship being done in the world. And those weeks were definitely some of the most formative for me. I think they were ones that really challenged me to go deeper in my faith and to I think ultimately they led me to consider ministry with my life, doing it vocationally. And so I loved, you know, and even we had to fundraise for these events. And so it was a way to get out in the community and raise some money for this event. And usually I didn't have to raise money because my parents were going to pay for me, but I was still doing these fundraiser events with my friends who were raising money for it. And it was always just really good experience to bond with them and to interact with the community and be able to, and Spokane is, I would say, more churched than the Vancouver area, the Portland, Vancouver area, but less churched than Boise. And so, you know, people know that you're a church organization. So how do you interact with people? How do you deal with people who are kind of opposed to Christ or Christians? And how do you still treat them well? And how do you be a good representation of Christ to the world? It was very, I don't think we didn't have like the biggest programming of youth group. It wasn't like we were doing big budget stuff all the time. We definitely, I mean, our band was the youth group. And so whatever we put into it is what we would get out of worship, which was another valuable lesson is, you know, putting work into worship so that it's rewarding and it's honoring to God. So that was something that I gained a lot out of youth group. Ethan, we were just talking a little bit ago, and you haven't been to as many camps, but how do you view, well, let's open up even outside of youth group. How do you view your summers at this time in your life?
At this time, it's really just more relaxing and just taking a break and just slowing everything down and just being like, for a couple of weeks at least. And
Yes.
then I kind of get back into the flow. But right when it starts, I tend to melt out a bit.
Yeah.
It's decompressing.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because high
Yes.
school's so stressful.
Yes. I'll say, you know, I remember being in high school and adults would be like, oh, you've got it so much easier now than you're ever going to have it in your life. And I would be, you know, stressing through high
Yeah.
school classes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, I can't take any more than this. But it's definitely a different type of stress once you get into the adult world. Something about high school is just you need that decompression time, I think.
Sure.
And I think as you get older, you also learn to decompress on a daily basis, whereas in high school, I think you don't get to decompress until you get a bigger spot of time. But
Yeah.
so that's your summers right now, is you're kind of decompressing. What do you think is the most valuable thing about summer for you? You had all this free time. Obviously decompression is very valuable and relaxing and recuperating from the spring semester is always valuable. What's another thing that you'd say is valuable about your summers?
Just having so much time to really, you know, explore different things and evaluate certain things.
Right.
And to basically find where I'm going to put my time. What's the most important thing I need to be putting my time in? Because I've got so much now. Because with school, it's like, this is what you need to put your time into is school.
Right.
And then you have this barely any time. And it's like, oh, okay, well, I guess I can spend some of that time to relax and then a little bit of time on some other important stuff and then go to sleep, do it again.
Yep.
But summer, it's just like, I've got all this time. I really need to find out what's important to me and what I need to find important.
That's good. I think that's something that a lot of students don't necessarily do and could.
I didn't.
And yeah, I think I might have had some of that, but not nearly as much.
Because by the time I was in high school, I kind of had walked away from the church just because one of the differences I feel like here and in Dallas is like I was talking about earlier, like church is very much a cultural thing and everybody's involved in it. So by the time that I got to high school, I felt like the girls that I was walking with and the girls that were in my small groups, like I had all these relationships with them, and then in high school everything changed and they started becoming hypocrites, and they would go out and drink and party and whatever, and then come to church the next day or come to church talking about their drinking parties, and that just bothered me. Like, I'm either an all or nothing person, and so I pretty much got fed up with the hypocrisy and said, I want to do what I want to do, and I'm not going to be a hypocrite about it, and I'm not going to sit in church and pretend like I'm doing anything different. So I pretty much walked away from the church in high school and did the opposite of finding things that were important to spend my time on and did absolutely nothing with my life. I stopped giving back to the community. I pretty much sat around and played video games all day. And I hung out with my friends and had fun, but at the end of the day, like, was it meaningful? Did I give back? Was I growing as a person?
Right.
No, I was making a lot of mistakes that made me grow as a person, but not doing it in a good way,
Negative growth.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so it sounds like, Ethan, you're kind of looking at the bigger scheme of things. You see this time as something that's not going to be there forever. You're not always going to have these summers, and eventually you're going to have to know what you want to do with your time. You're not going to have time to think about what you want to do with your time, and so I think that's really cool that you're taking the time to. It's a reflection process, right?
Yeah,
you're reflecting on, and you have the time to kind of go, okay, I'm going to spend today working on. I'm going to go biking. Well, that won't do that again. Just kidding. I'm sure they'll get back out there. But you get a chance to try out these things during the summer that you don't really get the time to during school, because you have these things that you have to learn your math, and you have to learn your English, and you have to do all these types of things. You're grinding through all that, and you don't really get the chance to look and see the scope of life that you do. Like, you get to do that in the summer. That's awesome. I like that. I'm going to try and do that, even though I still have to work this summer.
Right now that I have a job, I'm like, I feel like everything picks up in the summer. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's already July and I have so much to do and all of this is happening. And wow, what is it? What's summer?
This is my first summer
really
that I didn't get, like, every summer up until this summer has been like, oh, I'm ending school. Like, May, June comes around, it's like, oh, I can feel the end of school coming. I feel like it should still be like May or June right now, because I haven't had that release of school ending, which, it makes time fly by. But that was a nice time of like, last day of school.
Right.
I can breathe.
Right. Something to look forward to, like a break and like a release.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
You don't get those measurements once you're out of school.
No, you don't.
But very cool that you get to do that. Let's talk more about youth group now, Ethan. Both in Tennessee and here. So you went to camp last summer with our church, Acts Church, right? How did you see that experience? Was it like a deeply impacting time, or was it like a good time with friends to bond, or how was that camp? I hear good things about it, but I was not here for it.
It was really a good mix of both, because I had some friends that I hadn't talked to in a long time that came, and I didn't even know a lot of the kids there.
All right.
So the thing is, when I first joined, I was very awkward, and I didn't make a lot of friends. I made like one friend, and I was like,
well, you're generally a quieter guy.
He's definitely come out of his shell, though, this past year, for sure, I think.
Yeah.
I've been trying my best.
You're doing good. You're doing good, kid.
You're on a podcast.
You
now.
are.
Yeah.
Look at you.
Yeah, look at me.
Besides the glaring scratch on your face, look at you.
Well, no one's actually looking at you right now either, so.
I'm just saying.
That's a good thing.
Listen to you.
Listen to you grow.
But it was good. So one of the main things about that camp was really getting out of my shell and talking to people and hearing their experiences in life. And that's kind of hard to do when you're a kid because they don't have as many experiences in life. So it's like, how was your day? And they're like, it was good. And you're like, okay.
The end.
Good talk.
Yeah.
I hate school. The
probably
end.
now.
Yeah.
Well, we have that in common.
But this was a time for me to actually bond, hang out and bond with them and with God, because it was really an eye-opener, hanging out with all those kids and seeing all these kids get saved and hearing Glenn talk.
That
And
was really cool.
it was just really an eye-opener to certain aspects of life that I needed to change my thinking about and change emotionally and mentally about.
Right.
And it was cool at the end when we had a fire pit and we were all worshiping. It was just like
That was really
real,
cool.
yeah, it was like a real connection. Just see all these kids worshiping their hearts out. It was just really cool.
Very awesome.
Because a lot of these kids were very secular, and when you talked to them, they never talked about anything about God or anything like that.
They were coming to camp to have fun. And
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And because I hadn't seen them at youth group, but when camp comes around, now they're here.
Yeah.
But to see them actually worshiping, because normally they would just kind of sit there awkwardly and like look around, but to see them really putting some effort into worship was just awesome. So I think
Seeing
it was a good
them make that
experience.
connection.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I think I remember a little bit younger than you. I had my first camp. My first camp experience it wasn't a church camp. It was like a YMCA camp that I went to, and that was really cool and all. But it wasn't my next year of camp. Partly because I think my brain had matured a little bit, just biologically. You know, you're a little bit older. I'd crossed a threshold of maturity, and I think that I went to a week of camp where my parents actually weren't there, and it was a church camp, and there were lots of ministers and people like that there, and really God-centered youth leaders who I'm friends with to this day, from that 1 week of camp. And it really I remember leaving that camp being like, I see my life in a whole different light now. It was like, it was a very sudden, like, taking me from feeling like a child to feeling like I was becoming an adult,
Yeah.
you know, and I was still pretty young. I think I was 12 at the time going on. I was,
Right. That is fair.
you can't do that with 12. Sorry. You can't do the song
yeah.
I am
No.
12 going on 13.
That doesn't work.
It doesn't
No.
work. But I was, I think I was just 12 going on 13. And, as a little, you know, twerpy middle school kid, no offense to middle school kids, I like them. But you know, I was just like I was a funny little kid, and all of a sudden I was considering how God wanted to use me in my life. And I remember just thinking about like planning what I wanted to do with my fall and like with my rest of my summer. I was like, whoa, I have it was all of a sudden I found this purpose. I wasn't just going through whatever was in front of me. And it was a really impactful time, really changed. I mean, really, that was when I decided that I wanted to be in ministry with my life. I didn't really know what that meant. I thought it meant that I got to hang out with kids at camp all summer, every year, which I did do one summer. But obviously I found out later on that ministry meant a lot more than having fun at camp and changing kids' lives. But that is fortunately one part of ministry that happens. And that's one of the reasons that I think that one experience probably set me up to love summer.
So much.
From then on out. Yeah. Cause that was when, a lot of my life change happened during the summer. I think because I had the time to reflect, and be out of a daily grind to do what I was told to do. And I had the time to decide what I wanted to do with my time.
Yeah.
And I played a lot of video games and probably wasted a lot of time that I could have done.
It's a very important stage. And
It is. Yes. Yeah.
Very important.
Up until the video games got developed, people have really been missing out on a lot. You know, people never had full lives until video games came around.
Yeah, I know, right?
I don't know. For me, church camp, we not only did those service projects and stuff in the summer, we did big like CIY things like you called it, but it wasn't that. We would basically drive to the beach because we're, you know, on the Gulf Coast, so we would drive to Alabama or to South Padre Island in Texas, and we would have these ginormous, and I mean they were huge, like camp retreats where just hundreds of churches would get together, and I'm like telling you, we're sitting in an auditorium with like thousands of other students.
Yeah.
And you would get what you called like a camp high, you know,
Right.
that really high spiritual experience that some people don't think lasts longer than the week or like the month that you have it. But for me, looking back on it, those camp experiences just really proved and provided, just proved to me that God was real and God did exist, you know? So even when I walked away from the church in high school, like I knew that my soul was hungry and it was thirsty for something that I had experienced then, you know, for that, for either whether that was service or for that worship time or whatever that camp or youth group experiences was, those experiences were proof in times that I felt like God didn't exist and it wasn't real and he wasn't there. You know, those were always in the back of my mind of like, no, like this is a real thing and it's something that you need, you know, and so although some people think that like, you know, camp highs don't last longer than the week or the month, I would just disagree and say that those camp highs and those camp experiences of service and worshiping with other believers and just learning about Christ really did in the long run provide like proof that he is real and that he does exist and that he can work, you know?
Right.
And ultimately, like, that's what led me back to God was I felt empty and I knew that he was the only thing that could fulfill me. And I felt so fulfilled spiritually in those times of going to camp and, you know, serving with my brothers and sisters in Christ. I knew that that's what was lacking in my life. So shout out to all the people running youth camps and summer camps. And, you know, if you're not involved in a youth group or if you haven't been one, like try and go to one. And they really are life-changing, not only for that week, but I think that they have a really lasting impact on your life. Yeah.
I think part of the reason why they're so life-changing is because they are a time where it's just you and it's a time that whether you meant to do it or not, the people who are in charge of this event have set it aside for God and for him only. And so a lot of times, you know, you can't have your phone out at these events or
you get it taken away.
You don't have a TV. Yeah. You don't have a TV. You don't have all these influences that you're used to in life that
are so distracting.
Sometimes some of them are necessary, like things like school. Like you don't have school there. You don't have things like that. But those are necessary things, but you can set them aside for a week and be available to God. And whether you realize that that's happening or not, you're filling yourself with God's Spirit during that week. And I think there's some fair criticism of those camp experiences. And I think some camps err on the side of just trying to give students a really intense experience, and it's more like emotional manipulation than it is true life change. So there's definitely a bad side to there can be a bad side to camps, and that partly has to do with the camp, and it probably has to do with the student's heart. But at least you can't don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because they have been such instrumental things, at least in my life. I can speak personally in my life that they were kind of the same thing we're talking about. Is I might be in the middle of a really tough dreary semester of school and all my friends don't care about God, and I'm questioning if I care about God, but I can look back at that summer experience and say, no, there's something real there. There's something life-changing there, and it's worth hanging on to beyond this dreary Monday morning at school, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And those are really cool things to be able to look back on it. And I think I had to learn that I'm going to have a quote unquote camp high. I'm going to feel really awesome because I am setting aside all these distractions. Right. There's going to be really good speaking. There's going to be really good worship times. There's going to be really open and honest small group discussions, things like that. But if I can once I, my first camp, it was like, this is amazing. And then there's also the camp high crash afterwards where you're like, I hate everything because I'm not at camp. Right. And I would go through that and I'd be like, well, maybe I did something wrong at camp that is not lasting now. But then when I started realizing that, no, this is a special place, this is a special time where I am devoting myself to God. And sometimes I wouldn't get a camp high. Sometimes it would just be an encouraging time of seeing my friends encounter the Lord. And I would just kind of be there along for the ride because for whatever reason, it's just not speaking to me that week. I had some of those summers of camp where it was like, okay, I don't really feel like God is doing anything massive in my life right now, but it's still just great to be able to be there with my friends who are experiencing God either for the first time or in a new way or something like that. But being able to get that perspective and say, okay, this is a time where I am going to be more emotional because I'm getting less sleep and I'm hearing lots of powerful things. And but I am going to get something out of this, and I'm going to be able to look back at this as a time when I was closer to God than any other time in my life. Probably is a good way, I think, to look at camps.
What about you, Ethan? Ever experienced a camp high or just like a really spiritual high?
Both.
Yeah?
I've definitely had, from the one camp I went to, I did get a camp high from it.
Yeah.
And I already kind of talked about how like I thought it was really
So
cool.
especially that picture, that moment of the campfire worship,
Yeah.
I have so many of those as well, where it was just, I just felt so connected to God, and I saw everybody else feeling so connected to God. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So that basically sums up when I got my camp high. It was really towards the end after hanging out with all these guys, running around, exhausting myself.
Yeah.
But then going to worship and worshiping with all these people, it was like, it was like a high.
Yeah.
It was
Right.
like a camp high.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really the only camp I've been to. Mm-hmm. But I've had spiritual highs throughout my life and definitely spiritual lows. But I've had plenty of highs. Like one of the things when I joined the worship team, I kind of had like a spiritual high, like, I'm
this is
doing
awesome.
this great thing, And I realized later I probably should have been thinking more about God and instead of just how I'm like this awesome guy doing all this stuff, so yeah, just stuff like that. I've definitely had experiences like that.
And then would you say you also like kind of like after this last summer's camp, did you like kind of have like a crash or like how did it ever feel like questioning whether it was real, or was it just more like, did you ever have that?
Not really
experience?
questioning if it was real, just reminiscing and being like, it was a
Where'd that
happier
go?
time.
Yeah,
That was nice.
Yes. Looking back and going like, things were better back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely can relate to that feeling. And so I think I don't know if that like needs to come from like youth leaders, like, hey, this is going to be an awesome time. Don't let your memory of it like sour. Like that's what I think I did a lot of times, was I was like, this is lame now, I want to go back then. But really, no, it's just a different time now, and I have different problems facing me, and I'm more mature now, and I less naive, I guess, a little bit, I would say, and look back at those things with fondness and appreciate them and grow from them, but don't think that everything in life is going to be like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
for
That
sure.
point out.
No, you'll be in a rude awakening for sure.
Yeah.
If every time it's supposed to be a camp high.
Yeah.
Yes. So Ethan, let's close with this question, because I don't have time to have me and Kristen answer it as well. And Kristen and I are not young people anymore. We're
Squeeze me?
over the hill.
Oldies.
We're
Whatever.
so old at 23.
I did actually last night, like, really hurt my back by like bending down and cleaning out the refrigerator, and I was like, what is happening to me?
I hear you say a lot that I feel so old when I hear
do.
this song.
Well, I
So-
do.
it's
Or
like-
like when we were talking about Space Jam earlier, and you're like, I don't know what Space Jam is, and I was like, what? That made me feel
I
really
am
old.
so old. Yeah,
Anyway.
it's times are changing.
Times are changing.
But so Ethan, since you are both young and
Mature
a believer,
and wise.
well,
Not really.
Okay.
let's not get carried away with these descriptions. Just kidding, Ethan. You're great. What are some blessings and difficulties that you have experienced being a young believer? And you can maybe speak for your other young believers that you know who might be in different situations of life. But what are some blessings and difficulties being as young as you are and being a believer?
I would say blessings would be really the first time you find God and you just feel that feeling of like joyfulness. You're just like, what is this? What is this feeling? Because you're used to feeling like pleasure from like candy and like playing with your friends, but you're not used to like this good feeling that lasts, because
Just something deeper.
you've never gotten to that point in your life and you feel like you've unveiled this whole new world basically. And you have really. And it's pretty amazing.
This spiritual life that God has for you.
Yeah.
Right.
Like, I don't remember much from when I was 11, even though it was like 4 years ago or 10 or 11.
See, I am old.
But I definitely remember when I was saved and I just felt this amazing feeling. And I was like, whoa, this is awesome. And I was like, Dad, why do I feel so good right now?
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, that's definitely a blessing. Just really coming to terms with God, that can be a blessing and a difficulty. Because when you're a kid, you want things your way, you know? The whole universe is centered around you.
Right.
So,
Or so you believe.
yeah, exactly. So when you don't get the things you want and you actually like look into the Bible and it's like, I can't do this or this or this. It's like, what? That can be really difficult. But once you start accepting it and saying, okay, maybe I don't know everything, even though I probably do.
I probably do.
But maybe
Maybe that's one thing.
maybe that's one thing I don't know enough about or whatever. So you try it out and sometimes it goes good and sometimes it doesn't. But the older you get, the more you realize this is worth it. It might not be, you might not think it's worth it at first because the sin might feel really good and be super fun, but you know, it catches up. So, as a kid, that's definitely a difficulty and a blessing because it's more of a difficulty to really find out what's right, what's wrong, and why.
But it's a blessing to be finding that out as young as you are, because there's a lot more safety nets at your age to not let you get in as much trouble as you can get in.
Yeah.
And have the same consequence. Like
Right.
A sin that you get stuck in when you're 15 years old, if you get stuck in that same sin at 25, there's a lot worse consequences potentially.
So
For
like you're 25, you shouldn't be getting into stuff like this.
right,
You know?
yeah.
Or they can be a lot harder to get out of because, you just, I don't know.
Yeah, I think for any sin, whether it's like a really, like what we would consider like a really big sin, like, you know, getting hooked on drugs or something like that, you know,
Yeah.
you have so much more, I think people are so much more sympathetic of you for one, at that age. But there's so much more, time. Well, also your brain is much more susceptible to, I think, getting addicted by those things. But anyway,
Which is a down.
yeah, we're getting a little off track here. Sorry, but yes, at that age, it's much better to find out God's plan for your life at that age
sure.
than it is to find out at 30 or something
And I
like
would
that.
say it's a bit harder because you lack the experience to know. I've definitely, even very recently, I've known this from experience that you just need to trust him. I mean,
Right.
there's no way you're going to figure out stuff on your own. You
Right,
might
right.
think
Sure.
that you're smart and that you got a lot of stuff down. If you don't know everything, but you know, I know a lot. You
Yeah.
might, you know,
You trust
a lot
yourself more
less.
than God.
Yeah.
You want to trust yourself more than God.
Yeah, but you need to just trust God. And if he says something, it's kind of like with your parents and how you need to trust them too. Because I'm going to bring a story up real quick.
Go for it.
So basically, we were at Lowe's and we were buying like these concrete. It was like those slabs of wood, but it was like concrete or something like that.
Oh, I think you're talking about, it's like a concrete base at the bottom with a post coming out of it. Is that what you're talking about?
Post. It was just like flat concrete.
Oh, like sheets of concrete.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
And they were like in this really tall cart with like railings on it. And I was holding it, and my dad said, "Move your hand." And I said, "Why?" And then they just crushed my hand. It wasn't too bad. I ended up messing up my nail a little bit.
Yeah.
Being very sad.
Move your hand now. That's what
Yeah.
you should have said.
He said, "Move your hand," and I said, "Why?" I just left my hand.
Which
Why?
is so accurate. I do that to God all the time. And then it's just like, oh, well, that's why.
And sometimes it's even things where it's like, it's not like this is inconvenient for me to move my hand.
Right.
I'm just going to question you because that's who I am.
Because I can.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's stuff like this with God where you need to trust him.
Such a good
You
story.
don't want to get your hand crushed.
So
basically.
true.
Because, you know, it's better to be in the safe and trust him and find out why later
Yes.
than ask why and then figure out the hard way
hard
why.
way, for
Right,
sure.
right.
Because that's definitely not worth it.
Yes.
So
Well, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing some of those
Yeah.
things from your youthful experience. And hope that your face and everything heals up. I hope that your tooth heals too.
Yeah.
That sounds
I
like
hope so, too.
that's the really big thing. That sounds like, you know, your face is supposed to heal, but teeth sometimes can be. It's just not fun. Is it hard for you to eat at all right now?
it is.
Oh,
I
that's.
have
That
to eat
sucks.
like by his side.
I hate anything that impedes with my ability to eat. I just.
I have to drink with like a straw normally.
Yeah.
So
Oh
Bummer.
no.
those bottles are fine, but I can't like drink out of a glass.
Right.
Yeah.
It'll just like spill it all over your face because you can't like close your mouth.
And then
Oh.
like I can't
Yeah.
wipe my face off because then I'll be screaming for the next
Oh,
hour.
so you like have to.
I have to dab my.
I'm sorry for all this.
Bummer.
We're not laughing at you. We're not.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Kristen laughed at me enough yesterday.
I didn't mean to. I know I'm a terrible person.
We had a conversation with Kristen about this during our staff meeting this week about how she takes too much She's too humored by people's painful
not even-
situations.
It's not even that I'm like laugh at the other people. It's just the situation around it. Like, it's unfortunate. I don't know why I find it funny. It's
You appreciate.
It's just funny.
There's always humor in these accidents. There's always humor, and you just especially appreciate it.
I just find it. And okay, I'm sorry, Ethan, but I'm going to share that you were Two-Faced for Halloween this past year. And so Corey like painted half of his face to like look burned and scraped up. And now literally that's just like kind of what he looks like.
Too bad
and
it's
just
June.
the humor in that just kills me.
Yeah,
Like it
that's
just
true.
makes
That
me
is
laugh.
pretty funny.
It's so funny to me.
I think it's good to be able to laugh at yourself too when you're in
Yeah.
pain. Maybe it makes the pain go away.
I don't know.
Well,
For him,
except
laughing makes it like
It actually kind
Oh,
of.
right,
like
right. Don't
splits
laugh.
his wounds open
Just
on
kind of
his
just
face.
chuckle, straight face chuckle. Makes it look like a villain, though.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap up with some prayer. God, thank you for our formative years of youth that you have given to us, that you designed in our human lives, and I just pray that we would make the most out of those years, or pray that we did. For those of us who are already past that, I pray that you would be blessing whatever happened, that whether it was a good experience or not, that you would be teaching us through that. And then for those of us who are still of that age of formation and of youth, that you would be showing them what you have for them and the truth of your word. And there's so much in this world that is trying to tell them otherwise. So I just pray that you'd put people in their lives who love them and want the best for them and know you and want to teach you to them. We just thank you for all those youth workers who are volunteering or who are full-time staff at churches, just pursuing you and pursuing bringing youth to you, trying to share your word with them and be there for them when they are going through sometimes the most difficult things. Things more difficult than I could have ever imagined going through as a youth. There are students who are going through so much pain and drama and crisis during these years that they don't see you because of the mess around them. But I just pray that you would be in their lives and that they would come to know you through your love as displayed by your church and in your word. Just be with us all as we go. Maybe there's a youth student in some of our listeners' lives that they can be that person that loves them. I pray that you would be speaking into your church's hearts, that if that's them, if they have the place to speak for that you would be doing that. And we just pray that you would always be drawing people to you. And pray that we would be available to help you do that. Praising your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed that podcast. Hope you got to learn a little bit about a youthful experience. I think from what we can tell, mostly non-youth listen to this podcast. But if you're a youth, we're glad you listened, and we hope that you got something out of it. We hope that you, if you're listening to this when we first release it, you've got a summer ahead of you, and I hope that you have some cool plans to decompress, to have some fun, but also to contemplate what God has for you in life. What's a good way for you to spend the summer? That's always something worth pondering and worth considering, and you've got time to do that right now. In most cases, you've got the time to think through that. So hope you get a chance to do that. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we'll catch you again next week.